Chapter 3, Section 4, The Constitutional Convention. The Constitutional Convention opened on May 25, 1787. Delegates from every state but Rhode Island gathered in the room where the Declaration of Independence had been signed 11 years before. Congress had instructed them to revise, not replace, the Articles of Confederation. However, many delegates were already convinced that a new constitution was needed. Through months of debate, the delegates would work out this plan of government and then set it forth in a document called the Constitution of the United States. A distinguished group of delegates. The 55 delegates were the cream of American political life. Historian James McGregor Burns had described them as the well-bred, the well-fed, the well-read, and the well-wed. All were white men. Among them were former soldiers, governors, members of Congress, and men who had drafted state constitutions. Their average age was 42. The delegates represented a wide range of personalities and experience, and many were eloquent speakers. At 81, Benjamin Franklin was his senior member. The wisdom and amicable wit of this writer, inventor, and diplomat enlivened the proceedings. George Washington, hero of the Revolution, lent dignity to the gathering. Alexander Hamilton, his former military aide, brought intellectual brilliance. Other delegates, like Roger Sherman of Connecticut, contributed law and business experience. James Madison of Virginia was perhaps the most profound political thinker and the best prepared of all the delegates. A few key leaders of the Revolution did not attend. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were serving as representatives of the United States in Europe. Reading a list of the delegates in Paris, Jefferson described them as an assembly of demigods. Other leaders, like Samuel Adams, were not there because they opposed efforts to strengthen the national government. Patrick Henry was named as a Virginia delegate but chose to stay home, saying he smelt a rat. Indeed, many Americans remained fearful of giving a central government too much power. The ideas behind the Constitution. No one had a greater role than Madison. He worked tirelessly to develop and promote the new plan. For his role in shaping the new framework, he is called the father of the Constitution. The delegates' political views were strongly influenced by Enlightenment thinkers. English philosopher John Locke's ideas about natural rights and the social contract helped shape the Declaration of Independence. They would also be a guiding principle for drafting the Constitution. The delegates also looked to the ideas of the Baron de Montesquieu, another Enlightenment thinker. He favored a three-part government with separation of powers between executive, legislative, and judicial branches. These branches would work together in a system of checks and balances, each branch limiting the power of the others. This would prevent tyranny by keeping each branch from seizing excessive power. The delegates discussed these and other ideas for almost 4 months. Day after day, through a long, sweltering summer, they would debate, argue, write, revise, and debate some more. As they met, they knew that, once again, they were making history. The convention begins with a plan from Virginia. The first thing the delegates did was to elect George Washington as presiding officer. Next, they adopted rules of procedure. One was a rule of secrecy. The delegates needed to speak freely and frankly, and they could not do so if the public were watching. So despite the intense summer heat, they shut the windows, drew the drapes, and posted a sentry outside. The Virginia delegates wanted to establish a strong national government and promptly proposed a plan. The Virginia plan, written mainly by James Madison, was clearly meant to replace the Articles, not to revise them. It called for a national government with 3 branches, just as Montesquieu had described. The legislative branch would make laws, the executive branch would carry out the laws, and the judicial branch would interpret the laws. Under the Virginia plan, the new government would have a bicameral legislature, a lawmaking body made up of 2 houses. In contrast, the Articles of Confederation had established Congress as a unicameral or one-house legislature. The Virginia plan proposed that representation in the 2 houses of Congress should be based on the population of each state. This would give the more populous states more delegates, and therefore more influence than the states with smaller populations. New Jersey introduces a rival plan. For about 2 weeks, the delegates discussed the Virginia plan. Some thought it gave too much power to the national government. Some opposed a bicameral legislature. Moreover, smaller states did not like their representation in Congress being limited by population. On June 13th, William Paterson of New Jersey introduced an alternative to the Virginia plan. The New Jersey plan proposed a series of amendments to the Articles of Confederation. It called for a less powerful national government with a unicameral Congress in which all states had equal representation. Delegates of the smaller states welcomed the New Jersey plan. But after several days of debate, the convention voted to reject this proposal and return to discussion of the Virginia Plan. Discontent, debate, and the Great Compromise. For the next month, the delegates debated the Virginia Plan point by point. They continued to argue about the critical issue of representation in the legislature. Debate grew so heated that delegates from some states threatened to leave the convention. Finally, Roger Sherman of Connecticut came forward with a compromise designed to satisfy all sides. His plan called for a bicameral legislature with a different form of representation in each house. In the Senate, the states would have equal representation. In the House of Representatives, states should have a representation based on their population. Sherman's plan, known as the Great Compromise, resolved the thorny issues of representation in Congress. Slavery and commerce issues divide the states. Other issues also divided the delegates. Those from northern and southern states differed strongly on questions of slavery and commerce. A number of northern states wanted to include a provision for abolishing slavery, but most southerners opposed ending a system of labor on which their agricultural economy depended. Differences over slavery generated strong debate on representation and taxes. Since most slaves lived in the South, southern states wanted slaves to be counted in determining representation in the House of Representatives. Yet they did not want them counted when determining each state's share of taxes to support the national government. In contrast, the northern states wanted slaves to be counted for taxation, but not when determining representation. In the end, the delegates reached another important compromise. For representation in the House, every 5 slaves would be counted as equal to 3 whites. The Three-Fifths Compromise settled the dispute. But the contradiction between the ideals of the Declaration of Independence and the practice of slavery would haunt the country in the decades to come. North and South also argued over commerce. Northerners favored giving Congress broad powers to control trade. Southerners worried that Congress might outlaw the slave trade and place heavy taxes on Southern exports of crops such as cotton and tobacco. Again, the delegates reached a compromise. Congress would have the power to regulate foreign and interstate commerce, but it could not tax exports, and it could not outlaw the slave trade until 1808. Creating the executive branch. Another major issue concerned the formation of the executive branch. Some delegates wanted a single executive to head the government. Others were concerned that giving power to a single leader might lead to a monarchy or tyranny. They favored an executive committee made up of at least 2 members. In the end, though, the delegates voted for a single president. The next question was how to elect the president. Some delegates thought Congress should do it, while others favored popular elections. They finally decided to set up a special body called the Electoral College. This body would be made up of electors from each state who would cast votes to elect the president and vice president. Each state would have as many electors as the number of senators and representatives it sent to Congress. On September 17, 1787, after months of hard work, the Constitution was signed by 39 of the 42 delegates present. The Constitutional Convention was over, but the Constitution still needed to be ratified by the states. The document began with the ringing words, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union." Now each state would decide whether this plan of government was indeed more perfect, and thus worthy of becoming the law of the land.